I had just finished tucking my 1-year-old son, Samuel, into his crib. The apartment was finally quiet, and for the first time all day, I thought I might have a moment to myself. A cup of tea, maybe even a quick shower. My body ached from the endless cycle of feeding, changing, rocking him to sleep. I was still in my loose sweatpants, hair pulled up in a messy bun, when the sound of the front door opening froze me in place. I expected Eric, my husband, to walk in. Instead, he appeared with a woman at his side. She strode into our home with the confidence of someone who belonged there, the click of her designer heels echoing on the hardwood floor. Her name, I would soon learn, was Madison. She slipped off her stilettos, tossed her purse onto the bench in the entryway, and looked me straight in the eye with a smirk tugging at her lips. "Julia, meet Madison," Eric said coldly, his voice detached as if I were some stranger in my own home. "This is my wife." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. My heart stopped, and my fingers clenched the edge of the counter for support. "What did you just say?" "I'm your wife," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. But Eric didn't laugh. He didn't correct himself. He just stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, disgust. "Look at yourself," he said, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You've let yourself go. Always in stretched-out pants, stains on your shirt. When was the last time you looked in a mirror?" His words sliced through me, each one sharper than the last. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but all I could think was how many sleepless nights I had spent caring for our baby while he worked late. I had given everything to this family, and now he was throwing me aside like I was nothing. Madison shifted her weight, leaning against the wall like she owned the place. She gave me that smug, superior smile. "You should get used to this, Julia," she said, her tone dripping with arrogance. "He chose me." The rage that had been simmering inside me boiled over. Without thinking, I lunged forward and shoved her hard. She stumbled back, hit the wall, and collapsed onto the floor with a shriek that pierced the silence. "Are you insane?" she screamed, scrambling to her feet and straightening her designer skirt. Eric didn't go to her right away. Instead, he grabbed my wrist, twisting it so tightly that pain shot up my arm. His eyes blazed with fury, a wild look I had never seen before. "Enough," he hissed. "Pack up your kid and get out. I don't want you here another minute." I yanked my hand free, my wrist throbbing where his fingers had dug into my skin. "You're throwing me out?" I asked, my voice breaking. "With our son." "Our son," he spat, "will leave with you. You've got 10 minutes. I want you both gone before I count to 10. Madison crossed her arms and smirked, her voice low and taunting. "You heard him. Don't make this harder on yourself." The apartment, the place where I had dreamed of raising a family, where I had painted the nursery walls and picked out furniture with so much hope, suddenly felt like a stranger's house. My chest tightened and tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of Eric. I looked down the hall, where Samuel slept peacefully, unaware of the storm that had just torn through his parents' marriage. In that moment, I realized I had no choice. I would have to leave my own home, carrying my baby out into the night, because the man I trusted most had just betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. I bundled Samuel in his blanket and carried him out into the night. His tiny head rested against my shoulder, his breath warm and steady, while my own chest felt like it was collapsing. The cold Baltimore air hit my face as I stepped out of the apartment building, clutching him tight. I didn't even know where to go, but my body moved on instinct. There was only one place that made sense: my mother's apartment in Highlandtown. The taxi ride felt endless. Samuel stirred a little, whimpered, then fell back asleep. I kept whispering to him, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here. We'll be safe." But deep inside, I wasn't sure if that was true. By the time the driver pulled up to the familiar row house, my hands were trembling. I climbed the narrow stairs, balancing my bag on one shoulder and Samuel in my arms. When my mother opened the door, relief washed over me for a split second. She stood there in her robe, the kitchen light casting sharp shadows on her tired face. "Julia, it's late," she said, her voice more annoyed than concerned. "Mom," I gasped, stepping inside. "Eric, he threw us out. Me and Sam. We have nowhere else to go. Please, just for tonight." But she didn't open her arms. She didn't even step aside right away. Instead, her eyes flicked to Samuel, then back to me, cold and calculating. "Why did you come here?" she asked flatly. The question struck me like a slap. "Because you're my mother," I whispered. "Because I thought you'd help us." She sighed and rubbed her temple. "Julia, I don't have the space. You know this place is small. Where exactly am I supposed to put you and a baby? On the kitchen floor?" My throat tightened. "We can sleep on a couch, on the floor, anywhere. Just for a little while. Until I figure things out." She shook her head, already reaching for her purse on the counter. No, that's not going to work. Here." She pulled out a roll of cash, peeled off a few bills, and pressed them into my hand. "Take this. Get a motel for the night. You'll think of something tomorrow." I stared at the money as if it were burning my skin. "A motel?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Mom, I just got thrown out of my home with your grandson in my arms, and all you can give me is this?" Her gaze was steady, detached, as if she were talking to a stranger. "It's the best I can do." Something inside me shattered. I had come here desperate, hoping for safety, for comfort, for even the smallest sign of love. Instead, I was standing in the hallway of my mother's apartment, clutching my baby while she pushed me back out into the night. I swallowed hard, blinked back tears, and tucked the money into my pocket. I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. As I turned to leave, Samuel shifted in my arms, his little fingers gripping the fabric of my shirt. He was the only anchor I had left. Walking down those stairs, I realized the truth. Eric had betrayed me first, but my mother's rejection cut deeper. In one night, I had lost both my husband and my mother. And with that, I understood I couldn't rely on anyone but myself. I walked through the Baltimore streets with Samuel cradled in my arms, the cash my mother had pressed into my palm still stuffed in my pocket like an insult I couldn't throw away. I didn't want her money. I wanted her love, her protection. But standing out there in the cold, with nowhere else to go, I knew there was only one door left to knock on. Aunt Margaret's. She lived alone in a small townhouse in Federal Hill, not too far from the inner harbor. I hadn't visited often in the past year. Motherhood had swallowed my time. But I remembered the warmth of her kitchen, the smell of her homemade biscuits, the way she always listened without judgment. My mom and Margaret hadn't spoken in years, but that had never stopped her from checking in on me. I called a cab and gave the driver her address. Samuel stirred, blinking sleepily, then drifted off again. By the time we pulled up, the neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows on the brick facades. My heart pounded as I rang her bell, praying she wouldn't turn me away. The door opened, and there she was, Aunt Margaret, with her silver hair pulled back and her robe loosely tied at the waist. The moment she saw me standing there with Samuel, her eyes widened. "Julia? Honey, what on earth? Come in, come in." Relief flooded me as she ushered us inside. The warmth of her home wrapped around me like a blanket. She took Samuel from my arms with the gentleness of someone who understood babies, cooing at him as if he were her own grandchild. "You poor thing. You look exhausted. Sit down. Let me fix you something warm." I sank into the chair at her kitchen table, too tired to speak at first. Finally, the words spilled out. "Eric threw us out. He brought another woman into our apartment and told me to leave. Then I went to Mom's, and she wouldn't let us stay. She gave me money for a motel." Margaret's face darkened, her lips pressing into a hard line. "That woman," she muttered, meaning my mother. "And Eric. What kind of man does that to his wife and child?" She shook her head, then set a steaming mug of tea in front of me. You don't need to say another word. You'll stay here, both of you, as long as you need. The weight on my chest loosened just a little. For the first time all night, I felt the edge of safety. We sat together long after Samuel had fallen asleep in the spare room. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Margaret listened as I poured out everything. The years Eric and I had spent together, how I had sacrificed my career to raise our son, how I thought we were building a future only to have it ripped away. She reached across the table and took my hand. Julia, listen to me. You are stronger than you know. He may think he's broken you, but he hasn't. You still have your son, your mind, and your dignity. And you have me. Tears stung my eyes. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to cry, not out of fear, but out of relief. Margaret leaned back and looked at me with a steady gaze. You can't let Eric take everything. You need to fight for what's yours, and I'll stand with you. Her words settled deep in my chest. Somewhere in the middle of my grief and exhaustion, a seed of resolve took root. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make sure Eric regretted ever underestimating me. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Aunt Margaret's townhouse gave me and Samuel safety, but my mind refused to rest. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me I wasn't in my own home anymore. One afternoon, as I rocked Samuel to sleep in the spare bedroom, my phone lit up with Eric's name. You think the court will believe you had anything to do with my success? Forget it. I wanted to hang up, but then his voice shifted, crueler, cutting deeper. And another thing, how do I even know Sam is mine? For all I know, you were sneaking around while I was at work. The words knocked the breath from my lungs. What did you just say? I whispered. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the phone. You heard me. Don't expect me to support a kid that may not even be mine. If you want to play games, I'll demand a paternity test in court. The call ended before I could respond. I stared at the dark screen, my chest heaving. Samuel stirred in his crib, blissfully unaware of the venom his father had just spit through the line. I leaned down and stroked his soft hair. Don't you worry, baby, I whispered. We'll prove the truth. The next morning, I contacted a private lab in Baltimore. I didn't want to wait for Eric to drag me through court. They arranged a discreet test. Simple swabs from my cheek and Samuel's, placed into sealed envelopes, handed over to a technician with a reassuring nod. For days, I lived in limbo, every hour stretched thin with dread. When the results finally came, my knees nearly buckled as I read the words. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with rage. How dare he? After all the nights I had stayed awake caring for our child, he had the audacity to question Samuel's existence. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was war. That evening, I sat with Aunt Margaret at the kitchen table. The report spread out in front of us. She read it carefully, then folded her hands over mine. Julia, you can't face this alone. You need someone who knows the law, someone who can protect your rights. I don't know any lawyers, I admitted. My voice cracked. Eric has money, influence, connections. What do I have? Margaret's eyes softened. You have me, and there is someone. She stood and retrieved an old address book from the drawer, flipping through the worn pages. Richard Hale. We went to school together. He's one of the best family lawyers in the city. I haven't spoken to him in years, but I know he'll help. She dialed the number herself, speaking in that firm, no-nonsense tone I remembered from childhood. I caught fragments of the conversation, her explaining, her voice softening when she said my name. When she hung up, she gave me a small smile. He'll meet you, she said simply. Julia, this isn't the end. It's the beginning of your fight. For the first time since Eric had slammed that door in my face, I felt something spark inside me. Not just survival, but determination. He wanted a battle. He was about to get one. The day of the hearing arrived. and I felt as if my chest were being crushed from the inside. Aunt Margaret insisted on coming with me, her hand a steady anchor on my arm as we walked up the courthouse steps. Richard Hale was already waiting inside, tall, calm, with a reassuring nod that made me breathe just a little easier. Still, when I entered that courtroom and saw Eric sitting there in his tailored suit, smug and unbothered, the air caught in my throat. The proceedings began quickly. Eric's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man with a stack of documents, wasted no time. "Your Honor," he said, sliding a folder across the bench, "we have here a notarized agreement signed by Mrs. Dawson, transferring all rights to the property in question to my client." The judge raised her brow and glanced at me. "Mrs. Dawson, is this your signature?" I stared at the paper and my blood ran cold. It was my handwriting, my name scrawled in ink at the bottom of the page. My mind flashed back to all those evenings when Eric had placed stacks of documents in front of me, brushing them off as just formalities for the business. I had signed without reading, trusting my husband. Now that trust was being used as a weapon against me. "Yes," I whispered. My voice barely carried. "That is my signature." But I never knowingly signed away my rights to our home. He told me it was routine paperwork. Eric smirked across the aisle, his hands folded neatly in his lap. My heart sank, and for a moment I thought everything was lost. Richard rose calmly. "Your Honor, while the apartment may be tied to this document, we have evidence showing that Mrs. Dawson directly contributed to the launch of her husband's business. She provided capital from her own savings, funds she had set aside before the marriage. Without her contributions, Dawson Roofing and Materials would never have existed in its current form." He presented bank statements, carefully highlighted transfers, and even a dated record of my account withdrawals. I remembered those days vividly, how I had been so eager to help Eric build something of his own, never imagining that someday he would try to erase me from the story. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable. Minutes felt like hours as the silence stretched. Finally, she spoke. "The court acknowledges that Mrs. Dawson did provide significant financial contributions to the establishment of the business. While the apartment transfer cannot be reversed, the court awards her reimbursement for her share of the business investment, as well as damages for being forced from the marital residence with a minor child." Her gavel struck. Custody of Samuel Dawson is awarded to his mother. Full decision entered. For a moment, I couldn't move. Relief surged through me. Samuel was mine, safe, and no one could take him. But alongside the relief was a hollow ache. The apartment, the place I had once called home, was gone. It now belonged entirely to Eric, the man who had thrown me out like yesterday's trash. As we left the courtroom, Eric leaned close, his words low and venomous. "Enjoy your scraps, Julia. The house, the life. You'll never have them back." I didn't reply. Richard placed a steadying hand on my shoulder and guided me away, his voice low. "Don't let him get in your head. Today, you won something that matters far more than bricks and walls. You kept your son, and you proved your worth." Outside, the sunlight was blinding. I held Samuel's small hand in mine as Aunt Margaret walked beside us. And yet, as the courthouse doors closed behind me, I felt torn in two. Part of me victorious, another part broken. I had won custody, financial justice, and a measure of dignity. But I had lost my home, the place where I had once believed my future was safe. It was a strange kind of victory, one that tasted both sweet and bitter on my tongue. Life had just begun to feel bearable again. Samuel and I had settled into a rhythm at Aunt Margaret's house. She always seemed to know when I needed space and when I needed company. Some evenings we sat together in her warm kitchen, talking over tea, her laughter softening the heaviness in my chest. I thought maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind me. Then, one cold morning, everything changed. I was at work, trying to focus on simple tasks when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words struck like lightning. Aunt Margaret had collapsed on her way back from the market. A heart attack. She hadn't made it to the hospital. The world around me blurred. My hands went numb, and the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. "No," I whispered, though no one was there to hear me. "No, not her." I rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. When I saw her, still and pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, grief tore through me like nothing I had ever known. I held Samuel close as tears fell unchecked down my face. He tugged at my sleeve, too young to understand why Mommy couldn't stop crying. For days, I moved through life in a fog. Arrangements had to be made. Funeral services, phone calls, decisions I didn't feel strong enough to face. Richard helped where he could, but even his steady presence couldn't fill the void. Aunt Margaret had been more than family. She had been my shelter when I was abandoned by everyone else. And now she was gone. After the funeral, I sat alone at her kitchen table, the silence suffocating. Every corner of the townhouse still carried her presence. The floral curtains she'd sewn herself, the teapot that always seemed to whistle at just the right moment. It was unbearable to imagine this place without her. A few days later, Richard came by with a folder in hand. His expression was gentle, cautious. "Julia!" Before she passed, Margaret made some arrangements. She wanted to be sure you and Samuel would be safe. He placed the folder on the table and slid it toward me. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a quitclaim deed, signed and notarized. Margaret had transferred ownership of the townhouse to me. I covered my mouth, the tears starting again. She gave it to me. Richard nodded. She wanted you to have a home. She knew what you'd been through, and she wanted to make sure you and your son would never be left without a roof over your heads. I pressed the papers to my chest and wept. The grief was still there, sharp and relentless, but now it was laced with something else, a bittersweet gratitude. Margaret's final gift was more than a house. It was stability, a foundation for me and Samuel to rebuild our lives. That night, as I tucked Samuel into bed in the very room Aunt Margaret had once prepared for him, I whispered a promise into the quiet. "We'll make this a real home, sweetheart. For you, for me, and for her." It was a turning point carved out of tragedy. I had lost the only person who had stood by me unconditionally, but in her absence, she had given me the strength to carry on. It had only been a few weeks since Aunt Margaret's funeral when the knock came at my door. I opened it and froze. My mother stood there, wrapped in her heavy coat, her face composed but her eyes sharp. For a moment, I couldn't even find my voice. "Julia," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms, bracing myself. About what? She glanced around the townhouse, her gaze lingering on the framed photos of Samuel that Aunt Margaret had once lovingly displayed. About this place, Margaret's home. She was my sister, after all. You can't possibly expect to keep it all for yourself. The words hit me like a slap. My throat tightened. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. "You threw me and Sam out into the night with nowhere to go, and now you show up here, demanding a share of the one thing Margaret left to us." Her lips pursed, but she didn't flinch. "I am her closest relative. I have rights, Julia." Anger surged through me, sharp and unrelenting. I stepped closer, my voice rising. "Rights? Where were your rights when I begged you to let me stay with you that night? When I stood on your doorstep, holding your grandson, desperate for help, and you pushed us away? You lost your rights then." For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face. Shame, maybe, but it disappeared quickly. "I'll take this to court if I have to," she snapped. "Don't think you can shut me out." And she did. Within weeks, I was standing in a courtroom again, this time across from my own mother. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Richard Hale, clutching Samuel's hand, while she sat with her attorney, cool and detached. Her lawyer argued that, as Margaret's sister, she was entitled to part of the estate. But Richard stood, calm and steady, and dismantled their claims piece by piece. He produced records showing that my mother and Aunt Margaret hadn't spoken in nearly 20 years. Witness statements confirmed that there had been no visits, no phone calls, no relationship of any kind. "Your Honor," Richard said firmly, "this is not about family bonds. This is an opportunistic claim. Margaret Dawson made her intentions clear when she transferred the deed to my client before her passing. She wanted Juliet and Samuel to have a home, no one else." The judge agreed. The case was dismissed. I walked out of that courthouse with my head high, Samuel's little hand tucked into mine. My mother followed, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. "You'll regret this, Julia," she hissed as she passed me. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Standing there in the sunlight, I felt something inside me break free. The guilt, the longing for her approval, the desperate hope that she might one day love me the way a mother should, it all fell away. I had lost so much, but I had also gained clarity. I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need her coldness, her judgment, her absence disguised as motherhood. That day, I cut the last tie that bound me to her. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. After the court battle with my mother ended, a quiet determination settled over me. I realized that if I wanted to build a life worth living for myself and for Samuel, I couldn't let bitterness consume me. I had to channel it into something stronger. So I threw myself into work. I had started in a modest administrative position at a local firm, but with Richard's encouragement and Aunt Margaret's voice echoing in my memory, I began pushing harder. I volunteered for projects no one else wanted, stayed late to refine reports, and studied on weekends to strengthen my skills. Slowly but surely, people began to notice. My boss praised my dedication, and within a year I was promoted. With the promotion came better pay, benefits, and the reassurance that Samuel and I wouldn't have to worry about scraping by. The financial stability gave me breathing room for the first time in what felt like forever. I paid off lingering debts, set aside savings for Samuel's future, and even enrolled in evening courses to sharpen my expertise. Every step forward was like reclaiming a piece of myself that Eric had tried to strip away. But it wasn't just my career that changed, it was me. I started caring about how I looked again, not for anyone else, but because it reminded me I was still a woman, not just a shell of a wife who had been discarded. I traded the baggy sweatpants for fitted dresses, kept my hair styled, and found joy in simple routines, morning runs, a bit of makeup, cooking meals that made the house smell alive. Friends and colleagues began to comment. "Julia, you look incredible," they'd say. And for once, I believed them. I looked in the mirror and saw someone different from the broken woman who had left that apartment in tears. I saw resilience. Samuel grew alongside me. He was no longer the tiny baby I had carried out into the cold night. He was a curious little boy with bright eyes and an endless stream of questions. Each evening, we read together, laughed over silly stories, and I watched as his laughter filled the spaces that had once felt empty. He loved helping me in the kitchen, dragging his little stool over so he could reach the counter. Those moments reminded me that while Eric had stolen part of my past, he could never touch the bond one shared with my son. There were nights, after Samuel was asleep, when I sat quietly in the living room, the hum of the city faint through the window, and let myself breathe. I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. Every paycheck, every course completed, every bedtime story was a brick in the foundation of the life I was creating. I had been broken down to nothing, forced out, betrayed by those I trusted most. But somehow, in the rubble, I had found a way to stand again. Stronger, smarter, whole. And one night, as I tucked Samuel into bed and kissed his forehead, the thought came to me with startling clarity. I wasn't just rebuilding a life. I was being reborn. It was almost surreal how life had shifted in just a few years. Samuel and I were thriving, and the pieces of my life felt solid for the first time in forever. Then, out of nowhere, Eric came crashing back into my world. I heard whispers before I saw him. A former colleague mentioned his company had gone under. Bad investments, unpaid debts, contracts lost. His name, once spoken with respect in business circles, had turned into a cautionary tale. And Madison? She had abandoned him the moment the money dried up. The two of them, who had stood side by side that night he threw me out, were now nothing more than a bitter memory. So when Eric showed up outside my office one afternoon, holding a bouquet of roses, I felt my stomach twist with a strange mix of anger and pity. He looked older, thinner, his expensive suits traded for something that hung loose on his frame. The arrogance in his eyes had dimmed, replaced with desperation. "Julia," he said softly, blocking my path as I left work. "Please, can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a cafe down the street. I wanted to hear what he had to say, not because I missed him, but because part of me needed closure. He sat across from me, fidgeting with the bouquet, his words tumbling out too quickly. "I made mistakes. I know that now. Madison, she used me. She never loved me the way you did. And the business, well, it all went wrong. But you, Julia, you were always steady, always true. I see that now. I want us back. I want our family again." I listened in silence, my coffee cooling between my hands. He leaned forward, his voice breaking. "I miss you. I miss Sam. I know I don't deserve it, but please give me another chance." For a fleeting second, I remembered the man I had once loved, the man I had built dreams with. But then the memories came rushing back, the night he introduced Madison as his wife. The feel of his hand crushing my wrist, his laughter when he accused me of betraying him, his smug face in court as he tried to take everything from me. I set my cup down carefully and looked him in the eye. "Eric, you're not here because you love me. You're here because you've lost everything else. When you had money, success, and Madison, you didn't look back once. And now, when you're standing in ruins, suddenly I'm worth remembering? No, I won't be your safety net." His face crumpled, desperation flickering into anger. "Julia, don't do this. Think about Sam. I am thinking about Sam." I cut him off, my voice firm. "And that's exactly why this conversation is over." I rose from my chair, the legs scraping against the floor, and left the roses on the table between us. For the first time, I felt taller than him, stronger than him. The woman he had thrown out trembling and broken no longer existed. As I pushed open the cafe door and stepped into the cool evening air, I realized the truth. Eric's fall wasn't my burden to carry. His downfall was his own doing. And my strength, my rebirth, was mine. It was a Sunday afternoon when my phone rang, and I saw Eric's name flash on the screen again. My instinct was to ignore it, to let his words disappear into silence, but something inside me hesitated. When I answered, his voice was subdued, almost unfamiliar. "Julia, please. I just want to see Sam." For a long moment, I said nothing. The memory of that night, him standing in our apartment with Madison at his side, still burned inside me. But then I glanced across the room. Samuel, now a lively little boy, was sprawled on the rug, playing with his toy cars, his laughter filling the house. He deserved to know his father, even if that man had failed me. "All right," I finally said. "You can see him, but this is about Sam, nothing more." When the day came, Eric showed up at the townhouse holding a small toy truck in his hand. Samuel's eyes lit up the moment he saw him. "Daddy!" he shouted, running into his arms. The joy on my son's face pierced straight through me. I watched as they sat together on the floor, Samuel chattering excitedly while Eric listened, nodding, his eyes misty. For the first time in years, he wasn't the arrogant man who had thrown me out, or the desperate shell who had begged in the cafe. He was simply Sam's father. And yet, as I stood in the doorway, I knew nothing had changed between us. My heart no longer ached for him. I felt no pull, no longing, only a quiet certainty. When Samuel ran off to fetch another toy, Eric looked up at me. Julia, thank you for letting me see him, for raising him so well. I held his gaze, my voice steady. I did it because he needed me, not because of you. Don't mistake this for anything more than what it is. You're his father, and he deserves to know you. But as for us, we're done. That part of my life is over. His shoulders slumped, and he nodded, as if he already knew the answer. Later that evening, after Eric had gone, I tucked Samuel into bed. He wrapped his little arms around my neck and whispered, "I love you, Mommy." My chest tightened with warmth, and I kissed his forehead. "I love you too, more than anything." As I turned off the light and closed his door, I stood in the quiet of my home, Margaret's gift now truly ours. I realized that betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had transformed me. Eric had tried to strip me of everything, my dignity, my security, even my worth. But instead, I had rebuilt myself stronger than before. I had a career, a stable home, and most importantly, the love of my son. This wasn't the ending I once dreamed of. It was better. It was mine. And I would never let anyone take it from me again.